Okay, so welcome everyone to the talk part of the evening. So we're in a current theme called the beating heart of Buddhism. So we're learning about the path of the Bodhisattva. And a couple of weeks ago, Vadanya introduced the sixth and final aspect of this path, the sixth paramita, wisdom. So Vadanya introduced wisdom a couple of weeks ago, and we learned that wisdom is the Buddha's central teaching of conditioned co-production, also called Praticca which means that everything is dependent on everything else, and what follows from that truth is an Atman or no self. And as Vadanya explained, an Atman doesn't literally mean we don't have a self. Of course we do, we can experience that. But it means we don't have a fixed and separate self. So what we think of as our self, like all things whatsoever, is not fixed, it's not separate, it's conditioned and profoundly interrelated. So that's the introduction to wisdom that we had a few weeks ago. So this evening's talk is about wisdom, and it's called Embodiments of Wisdom. So wisdom in this Buddhist sense of the word really means the ultimate truth of how things really are. Everything's conditioned, interrelated, and it's beyond our ideas of fixed and separate things. So it's not that way. So because it's beyond separate things, it's beyond concepts and it's beyond words. So true wisdom is beyond our usual conceptual understanding, and it's a profound spiritual experience. So we're going to look this evening at how we can look at wisdom represented in a less conceptual way than talking about it with words. So we're going to look at wisdom embodied in images, so embodied wisdom. So we're going to look at wisdom embodied in a visual form. So in the Buddhist tradition, wisdom is represented in images, in images of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So that's what we're going to be looking at this evening. So I'll give us a bit of an introduction to start with to embodiments of wisdom, what they are, and how they can become part of our practice. What can we do with this? And then we're going to look at two figures in particular, two figures that are associated with wisdom. So I'll talk about Paranita, the goddess of perfect wisdom. And then Vadanya will talk to us about Manjughosha or Manjushri. So in the tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, we've got a rich array of Buddhas and Bodhisattva figures, and they've evolved over a long time. Within different traditions, they've evolved through contemplation and meditation and teaching. And you're probably familiar with some of them. So, for example, Green Tara with her compassionate activity, Padmasambhava, the great warrior of transformation, and Amitabha, the red Buddha of infinite love. So you may have come across these figures already. So firstly, I'll just say, some of us will just naturally connect with these figures quite readily and quite easily. And other people might have some questions or reservations like me, I do. So for me personally, I'm not going to do anything that I think is silly. I'm not going to do anything that I think is irrational. No, thank you. I won't be doing anything that doesn't chime with my intelligence, my understanding. And what I practice has to be in line with reality. So those are my kind of questions. So we might have questions like, well, why would we contemplate these figures? What are they? Am I being asked to see them as gods? Are they real? Are we just making things up? These might be the questions. Okay, so I'll start by saying a little bit about what I think about all that. So what are they, and are they real? Well, I think firstly, we've got to think, what do we mean by real? Okay, so the central teaching of the Buddha, conditioned co-production, Praticca, everything is utterly impermanent and profoundly interrelated. So there are no fixed, separate things. There are no real things. in the way that we usually think of the material world. And when we see things in that way, that's our delusion. So that's what the Buddhist teaching is. But we're so used to operating in that mode of awareness where we're seeing things fixed, we're seeing things separate, and we call it the material world. We call that real. But the Dharma's telling us that ultimately, that's not really how things are. And incidentally, quantum physics is also telling us that that's not how things are. And actually, we do readily accept this. We just might not have clocked it. So we fully accept as real many things that aren't materially real in that fixed and separate way, such as our thoughts and the mind, internal mental events, emotions, awareness, and consciousness. So we accept these things as being real and part of our life because we can experience them. They're in our experience. They're in our direct experience. So that's what we think of as real. Even though we're not thinking that they're fixed and separate things, they're not material things. So maybe what we can say is these figures are as real as that. They're as real as all that. Perhaps really all we can say about what's real is that what is real is what we experience and what has an effect. So these figures have a definite effect. They definitely impact and they definitely change us. And they've been around and affecting the human mind and human awareness for thousands of years, much longer than any single human being's been alive. Okay, so these figures have an effect and they change and transform us. And just another little bit of an aside for technically minded people like me. The Buddha realized how our experience works. So he said that we have contact with our senses, with something, and then we have a related experience, and we call that the feeling or Vedana. So we have contact through our senses, and then we have an experience. And the Buddha saw that the mind is a sense, just as is the other senses, the visual sense and the sense of touch. So we're similarly affected and transformed, whether we have sense contact with another being in the world, or whether we have contact through our visual sense, through contemplating an image, or whether we have contact through the mind sense by contemplating a figure in meditation. In each case, we're affected and changed by the experience through the senses. So it's the direct inner experience in our awareness that has the effect that creates change. Okay, so visualizing these images, it's actually a way of training the mind. It's cultivating a wiser mind that's more in touch with reality. So the wisdom teachings tell us that all conditioned things are impermanent, and so they're ungraspable. When we visualize these images in meditation, we visualize them as made of light. So they're manifested within our awareness, and then we allow them to dissolve again. So they're training the mind to let go. They're training the mind to not hold on so tightly to how we tend to see things and how we want things to be. They're training the mind to not try and fix things the same way. So they're actually training the mind to see things in much more in line with how things really are, and to try to train us out of seeing with delusion. Okay, so the figures themselves, they're rich symbols of qualities of our highest ideal, qualities of enlightenment itself. And these qualities are embodied, so the figures they're embodied in human form. And that can make the qualities more accessible to us. Our unenlightened human minds, we find it easier to identify with, move towards, and we find it easier to love that which is in human form. So images can be much richer and fuller than concepts and words can really convey to us. For example, if we have an image, a figure that's adorned and crowned with precious jewels and silken robes, then that says so much about the preciousness of that ideal to us, how precious that highest spiritual ideal is to us. So that in itself conveys attitudes perhaps of gratitude and inspiration and devotion and celebration even. Much more than those words can, devotion, celebration. It's much more to look at this image, can really convey much more than words. So how could we practice with this? How could we include these embodiments of enlightenment in our actual practice? Well, we can view images, we can contemplate images of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So we can just look at them and we can just allow a response. We can just see if we have a response or a connection. We can bring them to mind in meditation and bring to mind their qualities. We can contemplate their form and their qualities in meditation. And it's also really important to say, when we're doing that there doesn't have to be an image formed in the mind's eye. There might be for some people, but for other people, it's much more of a sort of felt sense of the figure. It might even be a sense of meaning or purpose or a sense of connection. And we can also connect with the figures in devotional practice, in ritual, perhaps through image, maybe through colour, especially through the beauty of the images and through sound symbols, through mantra, and maybe by making offerings and expressing our devotion. Okay, so that's a bit of an introduction to what these figures are. So now we'll move on to our first embodiment of wisdom, and I'll show some images. So this is Paranita. She's also known as the goddess of the perfection of wisdom. And I think this statue's from the 13th century in Java, in Indonesia. It's a very old statue. And this is a replica based on that, made by an order member that we have at some of the retreat centres. This one's at Taraloka. And this is a much more traditional depiction of Paranita, and you can see her colours in this image. And this is a modern depiction of Paranita, painted by an order member. So she's a mature woman, quite different to some of the other bodhisattva figures. She's a mature woman, a beautiful mature woman, and she's got golden skin. And she's adorned with jewels and robes made of silk. And she holds at her shoulders, she has, on the pale blue lotuses, she's got the perfection of wisdom texts. So she's associated with the perfection of wisdom literature, such as the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. So she holds the texts aloft at her shoulders. I'll just go back to the... And she's in meditation posture. So she's perfectly poised, she's perfectly still, and she's in deep contemplation and deep realization. But her mudra, so her hand mudra, is the teaching mudra. So she's teaching us. So she's active. She's very still. She has a very inner stillness, but she's active with compassion for all of us, all unenlightened beings. So she's endlessly teaching wisdom. She's showing the way to the beyond for us. So she's showing us the way to freedom from delusion, freedom from suffering, and you can just see that in her. Her whole composure embodies this kind of unfathomable depth of wisdom and stillness, but she's teaching us and showing us the way. She's also known as the mother of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So all Buddhas come about because of the perfection of wisdom. So the Heart Sutra says, all the Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. So that wisdom is her, that's what she is. It's perfect wisdom that brings about enlightenment, that brings about all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So she is the mother of all the Buddhas. So you can see she wears a crown, so she's crowned by the Buddhas. So she wears a crown with all the jewels of all the colours of the 5 Buddha mandala. So she's crowned by the Buddhas. So I'll turn. Oh. Don't know whether. Yeah, okay. So how do we connect with these figures? Well, we just need to explore them really with an open mind, an open and receptive mind, and then see what happens. And sometimes what happens can be quite unexpected. So for me, when I met Prajna Paramita, to just say a little bit about my personal connection, it just came as a bit of a surprise in that I happened upon her quite by chance, and it just felt like something slotted into place. So I described it as like a space opened up in the world, a me-shaped space, and I just slotted into it. I don't even really know what that means, but that was what the experience felt like. I just slotted into place somehow. And I kind of realized that I felt like I'd always been following her wisdom teachings. I was fascinated by her, and I was fascinated by the Heart Sutra. So I recognized her as my teacher in a kind of deeply personal way. That's how it felt. I feel like she's now my teacher. And also things like I feel like she's my voice and she's my language, and a kind of encouragement to practice the way that I do. So the whole meeting felt quite complete and total. It felt like a bit of a clarification and quite a relief, really. It was like, oh yeah, that makes sense now. And this kind of unshakable sort of confidence and trust that I experienced around that. And I think in difficult times, particularly, she brings metta, and she brings ease, and she brings strength for me. She reduces my suffering when I'm really finding things difficult. And I think it's perspective. So I think she takes me a little bit beyond my own self, she reminds me of what my vision is. And so she loosens this kind of holding and obsession with my fixed, separate self-concerns and my own particular fears. So she can really help with that. So now she's my sadhana practice, and she's the practice that I took at ordination. And I just love her. I just really, really love her. Yeah. So she can be a signpost really, and a portal, I think, for a kind of pointing to something, pointing to the beyond for me. Yeah. So that's Prajna Paramita, the goddess of the perfection of wisdom. So now we have a treat. We have Vadanya, who's going to speak to us about another embodiment of wisdom, Manjagosha.
Thank you, Paranita. Thank you. So, is that working? You hear me? The back? Great. Oh, I've got a talk. Somewhere. So, yeah, I'd like to introduce you to a different embodiment of wisdom, a male embodiment of wisdom, who plays a really important role, actually, in many schools of Buddhism, including, it has to be said, ours. He's one of Sangha practices, is one of these. is Manjughosha or Manjusri. So Manjusri's got two names. Manjusri means something like gentle Lord or gentle glory. And its alternative name, Manjughosha, means gentle voice, soft voice. So wisdom speaks with a soft voice, a gentle voice. To hear the voice of wisdom, we need to be quiet. We need to quiet all our thoughts, all that sort of, chattering in our mind. We need to take ourselves away from all that input and all those distractions that the world throws at us. To hear the gentle voice of wisdom, well, it's best done in meditation, but it's certainly not going to be done in a sort of world of distraction and constant thinking. Happens best when we're quiet, alert, calm, and focused. So wisdom speaks with a soft voice, a small, quiet voice. And it's not just quiet, but it's also very, very beautiful. Manjughosha has a beautiful voice. He's called the Lord of Speech. And it's said that he gives his devotees eloquence, clarity in their communication, persuasiveness. He's particularly associated with communicating the Dharma. So Manjughosha might speak to us through others when they teach the Dharma, but he himself is also always trying to speak to us. If we listen. And if we listen, we might hear his beautiful voice. So here are some traditional verses in praise of Manjughosha and his voice. Your speech, like music from outside samsara, takes away the suffering of every ear it enters. Pleasant and gentle, charming, heart-stirring, harmonious, pure and sweet like clear light, smooth, soft, calming. It soothes the heart, it brings delight, revealing the truth about things, easy to understand, bright, delightful, enlightening, reasonable, relevant, concise. Its 64-fold harmonies are present in every word you speak, speaking to countless disciples, each in their own language. As far as space can reach, your voice gives happiness to lucky beings, dispelling delusions, like a voice from the sky, like the deep thunder within the rain cloud, walking on its legs of lightning. So maybe that gives us a sense of Manjughosha's voice. Beautiful, beautiful, trying to speak to us. So Manjughosha's voice is very beautiful, but so is his appearance. So if we could, we've got his appearance. Well, so is his appearance. I've lost my place now. So is his appearance. Yes, so he's represented in lots of ways. We sometimes think there's just one way of representing these figures, but actually over time, many, many have evolved. But I'll describe what I think is the most common form. So as he comes into our minds, Manjushri emerges from a beautiful, clear blue sky, sitting on a translucent blue lotus that is hardly different from the sky. So he seems to subtly emerge from the blue of the sky. He manifests from the spaciousness and freedom of the clear blue sky, of space, of the void. He's eternally young. So he's a crown prince, and he is shown as a handsome, well-built young man. His upper body naked, otherwise royally dressed in silk with a jeweled crown and other items of jewelry, in the very prime of life, in the very prime of youth. He's golden in color. In fact, he's made of golden light. He shines from within. He's made of light. He's not made of hard, heavy stuff like you and I. He even shimmers a little. He wavers as though he's a reflection on water or a silk tent, perhaps in a gentle breeze. Sometimes his colour is described as like looking into a lion's eye. I've never done that. Or seeing sunlight in a lion's eye. And the lion is very much Manjushri's animal. He's sometimes described as Vadisima, traveling on a lion, riding a lion. Sometimes his colour is described as being like the sun. So he's the gold of the sun. He's the gold of a lion's eye. He's made of golden light. If you've ever seen liquid molten metal being poured, I sort of see him like that. And it's usually shown sitting in full lotus position, which gives him this sense of stability, of calm, of being above ordinary events. And that's a really important aspect of wisdom. And it connects with the quality of Shanti that we heard about a few weeks ago, when we talked about the blue Buddha Akshobhya. So there's a bit of variation about this, but Manjughosha is often said to be in Akshobhya's family, the Vajra family. So one important fruit of wisdom is that it allows us to be a bit above events. It makes us more immune to being blown around by what happens to us. So we see the bigger picture so we don't sweat the small stuff. And it's all small stuff. So Manjushri is sitting in this calm, detached pose of full lotus, and he's holding the sword of wisdom above his head in this gentle, poised, graceful way, not as though he's going to chop wood with it. So some of the more modern Tibetan and Nepalese images do look as though he's got a machete and he's cutting sugarcane, but that is not how it is. Originally, it's a very, very subtle blade, a very, very, very delicate blade. And to show that it's no ordinary sword, its edges are running with a network of flame. And to show it's incredibly sharp edge. In fact, this sword of wisdom is so sharp that it's said if you held it out and dropped a piece of silk on it, the silk would part without deviating. It will cleanly cut it in two. So Manjushri is also normally shown holding a book, as he's doing here, as with Pranya Paramita. He's holding a book with his left hand, holding it to his heart, showing that he hasn't just read it. He's taken it to his heart. It's become part of him. And of course, this is no ordinary book. This is the book of wisdom. This is the book that if you could read it, although it wouldn't be written in ordinary letters, if you could read it, it would completely change the way you see everything and completely solve all your problems. It's the book of wisdom. And he holds it to his heart. As I said, he holds the Dharma to his heart, showing that he doesn't just know it intellectually, it is his heart. It's what he lives from. It's the basis of everything he does. And his face is friendly and joyful. In the sadhana practice I do, he's said to be looking at you in well-pleased fashion. He wears lotuses above his ears, which is a touch I quite like, and a royal crown of jewels. And as I've said, his body is composed of golden light, so that it sort of shimmers like sun reflected on water. And he's got two auras. His main body aura is a sky-like blue run through with golden lines. I see these as like the lines of light that you see reflected in water. If you walk through water on a shallow water on a beach in a sunny day, you'll see lines of light radiating out, a beautiful golden light. And that's how I see it, as sort of shimmering lines of golden light. And the overall impression he gives is one of poise and ease combined with energy and playfulness. There's just this tremendous calm energy about his posture, as though he's always in the process of cutting with his sword, always moving while never moving. And this is highlighted by the fact that his robes and streamers are always swirling in the breeze of a higher dimension. So he communicates himself through his image. And I'll say more about a couple of aspects of that later on, but he also communicates through his mantra. So his mantra is Om Arapachanadi. Om is said to be the sound of the transcendental. Om. It emerges from the transcendental realm. It emerges from another dimension of reality entirely. And then Arapachana are said to be the syllables of the original alphabet, the alphabet of the gods, the archetypal dimension of speech and writing. So Manjughosha is very connected with communication through words. Words can't completely describe reality, but we need words. He is the Lord of speech. He's the patron bodhisattva of those who communicate the Dharma. So the Om Arapachanadi, the Om transforms into speech, archetypal speech. It's how the transcendental communicates to us through speech, if you like. And language. So it can be fashionable in some Western Buddhist circles to denigrate language and denigrate speech, language in general. We see our task as going beyond language, but what would we know of the Dharma without language? Well, what would we know about anything? I mean, we'd still be, I don't know, living in caves, perhaps, if we got that far. But what would we know about the Dharma or any higher teaching? Language is one of the ways that the higher dimension of being communicates with us. Language can open our mind, it can open our hearts, and it can even transport us to higher realms for a while. As we know from, say, reading great poetry, for example. And then finally, so we have Om Arapachana coming down to us through language, and then it ends with the syllable Di. The seed syllable of Manjughosha and also the seed syllable of Paranita Paramita. There's not much you could say about that, really. It's the sound symbol of Manjughosha. It expresses his gentle voice. It rhymes with free. It reminds me of the gentle noise that the breeze makes in aspen trees by a riverside. Or the sound of wind over water, creating ripples in the water that produce those lines that go out through his golden network of ripples through his aura. So that's a little bit about his mantra. I'd like to just go back to his image and see what especially the sword and his general appearance might communicate in a bit more detail. So his sword. So as I've said, it's a very, very delicate sword held in this very poised way, incredibly sharp edge, running with fire, running with light. And this sword is always cutting. And it's always cutting what binds us. So in his sadhana, he's described as cutting through the iron fetters of karma. His sword cuts through what keeps us stuck in the past, keeps us stuck in old versions of ourselves. It cuts through habit, it cuts through living habitually. It cuts through the idea that we can't do certain things or be certain things because we haven't done them or been them in the past. We define ourselves by the past. We often identify with our past mental states, thinking that we are the way we have been in the past, somehow in our essential nature. That's just the sort of chap I am, you know. But our mental states are just mental weather. They're just mental weather. If we see them that way, we can be free. We can be freed from them. We can take our passing thoughts and feelings and moods that just come up because of whatever circumstances. We can take them less seriously. And in doing that, we create the problems we create by our ways of thinking and feeling less seriously at the same time. We're liberated from them. So Manjughosha's sword also cuts away our ideologies and our views. The prison of concepts that we trap ourselves in so that we only see the world in a particular way. We tend to have fixed ideas about the nature of the world. And we have all sorts of ideologies that we've been conditioned to accept. So we have these ideas and we impose them on the world rather than living in the world as it is. Our rational minds are small and puny. They're much smaller and less wonderful than the miracle of reality itself. So when we live in our ideas about the world, we make our lives boring, predictable, and grey. Buddhism tells us we're all deluded. We're all conditioned to see things in an upside-down manner. And the first step towards wisdom is to realize that, which involves letting go of all our opinions that we hold so fast, or at least sitting loose to them, sitting much looser to them. Sitting lighter to them frees us up to live in a constantly changing, magical, beautiful universe of endless possibility. So most fundamentally, Manjughosha's sword cuts us free from the idea of the self, or the idea of myself. The self in the sense of the idea of this is who I am, this is who we are. And that's an idea. It's an idea in our mind created by the past, Our idea of who we are and what we are like is based on how we have been in the past. And all too often we let that define us to say we can't be anything else in the future. So we live in a prison where the bars exist in our imagination. And the bars are this idea of ourselves and the stories we tell about the world, about what is possible. And Manjughosha's sword cuts those bars. It cuts what the poet Blake calls the mind-forged manacles that stop us doing and being what we could be. So Blake's poem goes, I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. So we make mind-forged manacles for ourselves by the stories we tell about the way things are, about who we are, about what is possible, and then we allow ourselves to be imprisoned by those manacles. So that we get stuck in boring, outdated versions of ourselves. We get stuck in a boring way of seeing the world. We get stuck in a boring, safe life, and that all makes us grow old and stale. So Manjushri's sword cuts through these mind-forged manacles to give us freedom so that we're eternally youthful like him, if we allow that to happen. Because he is eternally useful. He's young, but he's also ancient. Eternally fresh, eternally creative, because he's not trapped by the past. So then at the highest level, the very highest level, Manjughosha's sword cuts us free from the very idea that we have a separate fixed self. Cuts us free from our small, cramped focus on our own wants and needs, and it frees us up to live a much more spacious, interconnected life in a much more interconnected universe of relationship with the world around us and solidarity with other beings. So that the overall impression and feeling he gives is one of poised, playful energy and joy and being beyond care. He's joyful and completely free from anxiety, free to respond with friendliness and compassion, free to course in this playful, appreciative way of being, free to enjoy the beauty of what is. And if we listen to that voice and invite him into our minds, maybe we could be more like that. And that would be very, very nice.